Walk into any woodworking store today and you will see the same thing. A wall of chisels lined up in neat rows, prices climbing from $20 all the way past $300, and a salesperson somewhere nearby who will tell you with complete confidence that the difference between the cheap ones and the expensive ones is the difference between decent work and truly great work. That is a very bold thing to say. It is also mostly wrong. Because sitting in bargain bins, on clearance shelves, in dusty mail-order catalogs that nobody under 50 has ever cracked open, there are chisels that professional furniture makers, timber framers, pattern makers, and boat builders have been quietly reaching for since before most of their customers were born. Not because they could not afford better. Because for the work they needed to do, there was no better. And here is the part that the premium tool industry would really prefer you not sit with for too long. The most respected chairmakers, hand tool joiners, and production carpenters working today did not build their reputations with the brand screaming at you from the front page of every woodworking magazine. They built them with tools that cost less than a decent lunch and outlasted everything else on the bench. If you have ever stood in front of a pegboard full of chisels and felt completely lost about what you are actually buying, this video is for you. By the end of it, you will understand exactly why a chisel costs what it costs, what that price really buys you, and which 5 tools the marketing world has been quietly hoping you would never examine too carefully. Before we get into the list, you need to understand something about how this industry actually works, because once you see the machinery behind it, you cannot unsee it. For most of the 20th century, a chisel was judged on 3 things: the steel it was made from, the geometry of the primary bevel, and how well the handle held up when you drove it with a mallet. That was the whole conversation: alloy composition, edge retention, balance in the hand after a long day of work. Then, somewhere in the 1990s, and especially through the 2000s as the internet gave every small tool maker a global storefront, a very different conversation took over. Suddenly the marketing was about heritage and handwork, about small batch production, about the workshop in a country with a difficult name to pronounce where a 3rd-generation bladesmith was personally forging your chisel over a coal fire his grandfather had built. Some of that is true. Some of it is true enough to be misleading. And a significant portion of it is a beautifully photographed story wrapped around a piece of steel that a competent metallurgist would struggle to distinguish from something stamped out in a larger factory at 1/3 of the price. The premium chisel market is not a straight-up scam. There are genuinely exceptional tools being made right now that are worth real money. But the gap between what you actually need to do excellent woodworking and what you are being sold as necessary for it is enormous. And living inside that gap, largely ignored by the magazine industry and the algorithm, are 5 chisels that professional woodworkers have been quietly using for decades. Tools that get picked up, get sharp, cut clean, and get handed to the next person when the original owner finally hangs up the apron. Not because anyone marketed them brilliantly, because somebody built them right. Number 5, the Stanley 750 socket chisel. I can already hear half the room checking out because Stanley makes the orange-handled chisel your grandfather used to drive drywall screws when he could not find a screwdriver. And yes, the Stanley tool catalog contains plenty of tools that are mediocre by any honest standard. But here is what most people who dismiss the brand entirely do not know. Stanley also made some of the finest socket chisels in American history, and the 750 series is the proof sitting right there in the historical record for anyone who bothers to look. These chisels were produced across most of the 20th century, and they were held to a standard that the company's current offerings do not come close to matching. The steel in a vintage Stanley 750 is honest high-carbon tool steel, the kind that flattens without fighting you, takes a real working edge, and holds that edge through serious material removal. The socket design, meaning the handle seats into a tapered cone rather than being jammed onto a tang, distributes mallet energy in a way that keeps handles alive through decades of hard use. Find one of these at an estate sale, a flea market, or the back corner of a used tool dealer's table for $8 or $12, and you have found something that a professional chairmaker or furniture joiner would be genuinely glad to work with every single day. The lesson buried inside the Stanley 750 is the same one that runs through this entire list. A company's current reputation tells you almost nothing about what that same company built 40 years ago when different engineers were making different decisions with different materials and a different set of priorities. The badge on the side is the same. The tool underneath it is not. And if you judge exclusively by badge, you miss half of the best tools that have ever come out of this country. Number 4, the Two Cherries 1PC Firmer Chisel. Two Cherries is a German brand, which already puts it slightly outside the American mainstream, and that invisibility in the domestic market is exactly why it ends up underpriced more often than it has any right to be. The company has been producing edge tools in the Remscheid region of Germany since the 19th century. That is not marketing copy. That is a verifiable historical fact about a place that was producing some of the finest steel work in the world when most American tool brands were still sorting out their supply chains and figuring out what they wanted to be. The steel Two Cherries uses is a chrome vanadium alloy that sharpens cleanly, holds its edge through regular professional use, and does not require a weekend course in metallurgy to maintain properly. What gets these chisels ignored in American shops is almost entirely aesthetic. There is no striking design. There is no fancy retail packaging. The handles are simple hornbeam, which is a dense, shock-resistant European hardwood that does exactly what a chisel handle needs to do without calling any attention to itself. Woodworkers who have been buying tools based on how they photograph walk right past Two Cherries and gravitate towards something with more visual drama and a better backstory. Woodworkers who have been cutting dovetails and chopping mortises for 20 years quietly pick them up, check the flat of the back, feel the weight at the shoulder, and put them in the cart without saying a word to anyone standing nearby. That silence is the highest possible endorsement in a working shop. Number 3, the Buck Brothers Socket Firmer Chisel. Buck Brothers is an American brand with roots going back to the 1850s in Millbury, Massachusetts, and for most of that history, their tools were standard issue in the workshops of professional carpenters, joiners, and boat builders across New England. These were production tools. Tools that went to work Monday morning and came back to the rack on Friday and did it again the following week without complaint. Then the brand went through the kind of ownership changes that swallowed so many old American tool companies, and somewhere in that process, most people assumed it had gone soft, gone corporate, gone the way of every other once proud name that got bought and turned into a label on something mediocre. Here is the nuance that matters. The older Buck Brothers production is genuinely excellent, and even the more recent production, available through woodworking catalogs at prices that feel almost suspiciously low, routinely outperforms its price point by a margin that is hard to explain until you put one flat on a coarse stone and feel what the steel does. A Buck Brothers Socket Firmer Chisel in 3/4 inch or 1 inch is a workhorse in the most literal sense. It is not glamorous. The finish is utilitarian. But drive one through white oak with a wooden mallet for a full day of heavy mortising, and then tell me whether you needed the Japanese steel and hand-rubbed lacquer finish to accomplish the work. Most woodworking, even excellent woodworking done at the highest level of craft, is not done with extraordinary tools. It is done with good tools, sharpened properly, used by someone who has spent serious time learning their material. The tool follows the craftsman. It was always the craftsman. Right here is a good place to stop for just a moment and say something directly. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribing to the channel costs you nothing, and it means this kind of honest look at tools keeps getting made instead of another video where someone tells you that you cannot cut a proper mortise without spending $400 on a chisel. And if you are already thinking about where to find these tools and what to look for when you are buying used, I put together a guide that covers exactly that. I will come back to it at the end. Number 2, the Narex Richter Chisel. Narex is a Czech company, and if you felt your attention drift for half a second when you heard that, that reaction is exactly the problem this video is trying to solve. Narex has been manufacturing edge tools in the Czech Republic for over 70 years. Their Richter line is produced from Czech 59 CRV3 steel, a chromium vanadium alloy that leaves the factory hardened to 58 to 59 on the Rockwell scale. That number matters because it sits precisely in the range where steel is hard enough to hold a working edge through demanding use, but not so brittle that a moment of unexpected stress turns the tip into a liability. The out-of-the-box grind on Narex Richter chisels is not show quality, and I want to be completely honest with you about that going in. You are going to spend real time at the sharpening stones before one of these is ready to cut at its best. But here is what the expensive chisel conversation almost never addresses directly enough. Every chisel you will ever own benefits from tuning before it is truly ready to work. Every single one, regardless of price. The difference is that with a Narex Richter, you spend $25 and spend 40 minutes at the bench getting the tool where it needs to be. With a premium chisel at 8 or 10 times that price, you spend $200 and sometimes the exact same 40 minutes doing the exact same work. The steel at the end of that process is not 10 times sharper. It just has a considerably better story attached to it. Narex has become the quiet default choice of woodworking teachers, trade program instructors, and professional makers who need to outfit a full shop with reliable tools without destroying a budget. When the people who teach this craft for a living vote with their purchasing decisions, that is not an accidental outcome. That is the closest thing the tool world has to a standing ovation. Number 1, the Marples Blue Chip Chisel. Say the name Marples to a British woodworker of a certain generation, and the response you get is immediate and completely unambiguous. In the United Kingdom, Marples was never a budget chisel brand. It was the standard. It was the tool that sat in the apron of the joiner building the cabinet and the timber framer laying out the mortise, and the apprentice who had just been told by someone with 40 years of calluses on their hands to go get a proper chisel and stop wasting the morning. Marples Blue Chip Chisels, the classic production made through the second half of the 20th century, are built from a chrome vanadium steel that is honest, workable, and fully capable of holding an edge through demanding professional work day after day. The handles are a dense blue polypropylene over a full-length steel bolster, which means you can drive them with a metal hammer, a wooden mallet, or a rubber-faced mallet all day long without lying awake at night wondering whether the handle is going to fail before the job is done. These are tools designed by people who understood that a chisel is a production instrument, not a display object. And then those chisels arrived in America. And somewhere in the translation between the professional British market that knew exactly what they were and the American retail context that had no cultural reference point for them, they ended up in the discount section, bought in sets, given as gifts, left in kitchen drawers, picked up at garage sales for $3 apiece by people who were not entirely sure they even wanted them. And that image right there is the entire story of this list compressed into a single scene. A tool with a legitimate professional pedigree used by tradesmen across an entire country for multiple generations, sitting in a cardboard box on a folding table in someone's driveway because it does not carry the right passport. A properly sharpened vintage Marples Blue Chip Chisel purchased for almost nothing is an instrument that working furniture makers have used to produce pieces that ended up in galleries and private collections and auction houses. Not because the chisel was magic. Because the chisel was right. And right is all any tool ever needs to be. So what does any of this mean if you are standing in a store right now or scrolling through a tool website trying to make a smart decision? It means the conversation you need to be having has nothing to do with brand recognition, nothing to do with country of origin, and nothing to do with which chisel has the most compelling backstory or the most expensive packaging. The only questions that matter are steel hardness, bevel geometry, handle durability, and whether the tool will take a clean edge and hold it through the work in front of you. Those are the 4 questions. Everything else is marketing. Everything else is the tool industry, engineering, and environment where the expensive option feels inevitable and the affordable one feels like a compromise your skills do not deserve. Here is the truth that master woodworkers figured out a long time ago and have never needed to revisit. A sharp, cheap chisel beats a dull, expensive chisel every single time, in every species of wood, in every joint, in every shop in the world, without exception. Sharpness is the variable that matters most, and sharpness is entirely under your control. The chisel that costs $10 at an estate sale and takes a perfect polished edge is doing exactly the same mechanical work as the one in the velvet-lined box at $250. The wood does not know the difference. Only the receipt does. What made the tools on this list worth talking about was not a marketing department or a photogenic forge. It was a metallurgist who got the alloy right, and a company that decided to build something properly instead of something that merely looked proper. None of that requires a premium price tag. It only requires that somebody in the chain of production actually cared. Before we close, I want to answer the question I get most often. People want to know whether buying used tools is actually smart, or whether you are just inheriting someone else's problems. The honest answer depends entirely on one thing: knowing what to look for before any money changes hands. A used chisel with a pitted back, a cracked socket, or a handle compressed from years of abuse is not a bargain at any price. A used chisel with honest wear, a clean socket, and steel that still flattens without fighting you is one of the best purchases you will make in this craft. The difference between those 2 outcomes is exactly what the guide linked below covers. It walks through the whole process of buying used edge tools without getting burned, what to inspect first, what sellers do not tell you, and how to bring a neglected vintage chisel back to full working condition. The link is in the description. These tools were built when the expectation was simple: make it right, make it last, make it worth keeping. The very least we can do is learn how to find them and stop paying $300 for a story when a $15 chisel at a flea market will cut the same joint just as cleanly.